This video remained at a modest amount of views for over a year when all of a sudden, Jesus! Probably because I was far from the only one feeling that Call of Duty had lost its focus over the dozens of games that had been released. While memes and jokes at Call of Duty's expense aren't exactly inaccurate, videos like mine were trying to explain that there was more to it than spaceships and gingerbread costumes. Call of Duty used to be renowned for its high-quality campaigns, before degrading into a multiplayer amalgam of FPS cliches, seemingly aimed at manipulating the addicted rather than compelling the masses. Sledgehammer opened Pandora's box with Advanced Warfare, and World War II seemed to be the effort to finally close it. No more advanced mobility, regenerating health, stupid villains, or insane plots. These decisions are an acknowledgement that Call of Duty became the power fantasy it used to stand out from. They're well-meaning attempts to resurrect the intensity and tension of past games, as well as the name's benchmark status. It's surprising because, frankly, there's plenty of reasons for World War II to not give a damn about solving this problem. 1/5 of the player base is invested in Call of Duty's founding feature, campaigns haven't been taken seriously in years, and the most lucrative areas of recent entries is the opposite of immersion and innovation. Yet Black Ops 3, Infinite Warfare, and now World War II have plenty of ambition, suggesting there's a real desire to elevate the franchise beyond yearly deathmatches, despite its current reputation and appeal. Perhaps it's because 1/5 of a consumer base this massive is still a lot, or that campaigns are what will be talked about in the years to come. Regardless, the point I tried to make is that Call of Duty's recent entries didn't falter because they're phoned in. It's because old mechanics were repurposed in ways they were never designed for. World War II doesn't have this problem. It's poised to be grounded, gritty, and graphic. Technology is its greatest asset. Because this setting became a trend from the late 90s and early 2000s, it's not been rendered with this level of fidelity before. In particular, the lighting, textures, and animations give the game a crisp image that makes it stand out despite the plethora of video games that have depicted its locations. It's easy to see the technical leap from the last time Call of Duty visited this setting, and the changes to gameplay from recent entries are felt very quickly. Unlike Advanced Warfare that opened up with picking off enemies like fleas, World War II begins with the player as the underdog, pinned down by enemy gunfire, punished for every shot taken, and this design is found throughout the game. You're always encouraged to lay down smoke grenades, clear the first squad with your rifle, and load up on supplies from your allies. That's another element too. Teammates don't merely exist just to block doorways, they're attached to the mechanics themselves and assist with ammunition, health packs, grenades, artillery, and marked targets. It's not Rainbow Six, but it doesn't need to be. They exist to emphasize that your character is one cog in the largest of machines. There's brutality that hasn't been portrayed since World at War with lots of blood, gore, and explosive weapons. It even attempts to raise the emotional torment with civilians, worn-down troops, and prisoners of war. You fight overwhelming odds, sneak your way behind enemy lines, and progress through an occupied nation. Everything to make Call of Duty what it was is here. Except for one thing. Linear games are called as such for being a directed experience. They organize and pace their levels, designs, and systems into the most profound order. But linear is slowly becoming more literal. Call of Duty 2 is linear, but it still has a sandbox. Control is rarely taken away, all enemies that can be seen are relevant to gameplay and can be killed, and sections don't conclude until the player has accomplished their objective or all hostiles have been cleared. A level in Call of Duty 2 isn't linear in the sense of giving you a single path. What's linear are the situations it presents, the challenges it puts you up against, where you're left to use the game's core mechanics to overcome them. World at War is similar. When it sets up an ambush, you're not limited to one spot, enemy, or ability. You can take cover prior to the attack, lob grenades, or aggressively push, and all are tactics the game accepts. The game is linear, but the player is free. And this is what's different with Sledgehammer's World War II. Its usage of QuickTime events, cinematics, and set pieces may seem inconsequential, but when inspected, add up to separate this game greatly from its previous World War II offerings. For reference, the opening mission is approximately 20 minutes long, probably less on easy or normal difficulty. Over 3 minutes is dedicated to your ship and its landing. 4.5 is spent in a QuickTime event rescuing a fellow soldier. Add on top of that the 30 seconds spent planting explosives, and you've got the player spending 8 of those 20 minutes with limited to no control. The second mission is an even greater offender at around 10 minutes. Missions such as 3 and 4 let this go, but what permeates World War II's campaign in its entirety is this unnecessary restriction. Opening doors, planting explosives, or concluding firefights do not need to be scripted cinematics, yet the game demands these moments have their own camera movement, animations, and no input from the player, except when it changes its mind. It may seem like a nitpick to complain about door animations, but when a level in Paris allows you to open windows for entering and escaping, it stands out, because the only reason you would script something this basic is a commitment to avoiding gamey elements, like opening things with the Force, a commitment that this Call of Duty doesn't possess. Cinematics should portray sequences that can't be done through mechanics, yet the campaign predetermines what used to be dynamic in the past. Here's a situation any player should be familiar with: holding off enemies with a sniper rifle as they slowly overwhelm you. In Call of Duty 2, enemies you missed were able to make their way into your bunker and challenge in close quarters. In World War II, soldiers don't invade, meaning the only punishment for missing is more enemies shoot at you. With your reliable health pack dispenser and bullet time powers, punishment is a grand overstatement. This uneventful sequence is made all the worse by its conclusion. Instead of picking up a Panzerschreck and destroying a vehicle in gameplay, an explosion knocks the sense out of your character, he falls out of a building, and slowly crawls towards the launcher before blowing up the enemy vehicle just in time. It is a large task to craft animations, AI, and levels that both run dynamically and without fault.
Well, one of the things about Call of Duty 1 where some people felt it was a little too linear, so we wanted to open up the gameplay. This required reinventing the AI completely, because we didn't know which direction the player would be approaching an objective from. So you can't just pre-plan a course and do a series of scripted events. You need to really algorithmically figure out how to respond to what the player's going to do from any angle.
But the more I think about it, the more I doubt Call of Duty's increasing linearity is due to a lack of time or resources. Development cycles have gotten longer since 3 studios handle the franchise. Campaigns are always given a large budget as it's used to market the game. And these cinematics often feature unique animations or effects that need to be made for each particular scene. Thousands of dollars was spent fully capturing this actor's body and face. Days were probably spent making sure each crumbling piece of debris is just right. And all of this work is done to make scenes that are less compelling than a 12-year-old game made by a few dozen people. In fairness, Call of Duty 3 had a lot of these same problems back in 2006. But even then, you could at least shoot enemies during a scripted sequence and they'd respawn and react. In World War II, that is forbidden. Manage to sneak past tanks and get to the objective? Too bad. Have a rocket launcher to take care of turrets? Not happening. Sniper pinning you down? We're going to mask him behind a light so that you can't suppress or fire back like any other sniper in the game. These are reminiscent of EA's Medal of Honor reboots that were mocked for being Call of Duty ripoffs. It used tricks like invincible enemies in order to set up the rest of the level's events. Battlefield 3 also used BS triggers for false tension and close calls, and was lambasted for it, to where even Battlefield 4 opened things up, only for Call of Duty to follow the errors of its own imitators. The worst offender is a sequence near the end where you need to blow up a tank by thermal grenades, but you can't plant or throw them. Instead, you need to walk up to the tank, press X, and watch an animation of your character placing them. Only if you get shot while watching your character, the game cancels the animation and you need to try again. It makes the visuals a team of people spend animating, texturing, lighting, and scripting a waste because of how jarring it is, and it separates the player enough to feel disconnected, but not enough where they could empathize with the character's conflict as a passive viewer. Sledgehammer's World War II may have all the elements to make a great Call of Duty game, but with player control this frequently limited, the greatest story and gameplay in the world wouldn't be able to escape this monolithic shadow. But out of interest for wanting to like this campaign, let's remove the shadow and examine gameplay and story, isolated from its direction. The former has an improved core for certain. Advanced Warfare handed you a host of abilities that encouraged you to be aggressive, but with gunplay and level design which rewarded burst firing from a distance. In World War II, there's more consistency. You want to be overlooking enemies from the high ground at a distance, which is what makes close-range battles more intense. That, and the setting just inherently suits it with locations, tactics, and weaponry of the time. The 1940s didn't really have weapons that could multitask, which immediately gives each category a unique role and feel. Roles that you're required to fit within your character's ability. And speaking of which, let's talk regenerating health, because the announcement of its removal in World War II honestly made me more concerned than excited. Call of Duty 2 didn't just ditch health packs to hang out with the cool kids. It did it because an at-the-time standard health system didn't make sense in a game where you're constantly being shot by hit-scan weapons. Health bars are best suited to games where damage is always avoidable, and any taken is your own fault. It does make the player careful in their movements, but Infinity Ward's sequel accomplished this too by making your character weak, and you didn't need to be tediously rewatching animations between every checkpoint. That, and I never found a situation without health packs to spare, and I couldn't call upon teammates to get some. This isn't Bioshock Infinite where you're close to death and Elizabeth saves your ass with a much-needed kit. You're calling the shots. Without your word, these soldiers just leave you to die, and there's no sense of camaraderie or concern. Veteran difficulty is my favorite way to play certain games, but even hardened in this one feels tedious, because nothing is different about it other than spending more time injecting drugs. In fact, nearly all of the abilities ultimately make the game less exciting. Enemies can be highlighted, you've always got grenades and ammo for your favorite guns, and there's bullet time for some reason. These are solutions to problems that didn't exist. Sniping has never been difficult enough to warrant slowing our dimension. Enemies are supposed to be concealed, that's what soldiers do. Holding on to your M1 Garand while being constantly tempted with the more ubiquitous but harder to use Kar 98 added to the experience. When your allies just siphon out all the tension that came from these elements, it does the opposite of making someone connect with them. I'm going to put the spoiler warning here, but trust me as someone who avoided them for months, it's not worth it. Private Daniels is a strong soldier guarding his horror. He speaks of his brother, who taught him to be the man he is today. He writes to him, thanks him, but known only to Daniels, is dead because of his mistakes. Guilt has made him desperate, distraught, and disgruntled, and he avows to never allow another brother, family, to fall again. Do you know when this tale of redemption is told to the player? 1 minute before the game starts ending.
What? Oh, God. What?
It's like having Luke stare at the horizon a minute before blowing up the Death Star. If there's ever a time to stage a tragic opening, it'd be this one. Having the player get used to the movement and shooting in an open-ended forest, maybe have their brother toss them some ammunition, and show the character's growth through gameplay with slow reloads which lead to your brother's death, contrasting with the experience of being a soldier on the battlefield. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying an opening like this would instantly be great. It is cliché and linear, but at the very least there's a story for the player to attempt getting invested in with tangible themes. A familiar story can still be presented in an elegant fashion. World War II's is poorly organized and remarkably condescending. I may portray myself to be calm in my videos, but there's a moment that legitimately made me walk away from the campaign and not want to finish it. And it came just after the infamous train crash.
I believe these men belong to you.
I see you've met Rousseau. She's with the Maquis, French resistance.
She killed a crowd that was gunning for us.
Right, Major.
We'll need your help in securing
Don't know
intelligence
how,
from
but
the
Zus
wreckage.
and I survived wrecking that train long enough to find ourselves rendezvousing with a tough French gal. Goes by Rousseau. She's a member of the resistance, and if you can believe it, she made us paw through the wreckage for some papers.
I don't mean to sound exactly like the internet's busiest music nerd, but there's only one reason you would iterate something this blatantly, and it's you think your audience is stupid. That may fit within Call of Duty's reputation right now, but I'm starting to believe I have a higher opinion of this fanbase than the developers do. There isn't a consistency in tone, theme, or even style here. The game puts so much emphasis on being a private in mankind's largest conflict, only to rip vehicle sequences straight out of Modern Warfare 3. German troops flip-flop between humanized enemies to cardboard cartoon villains, cutscenes are half the frame rate of gameplay, and twists like the dead brother exist for no one but the audience. The only consistency in this story is its inconsistency. And really, that's this game as a whole. No, this series. Call of Duty's identity used to be an FPS that portrayed intensity and chaos of war like nobody else. But it's not an experience anymore, it's a platform for consumers to spend and publishers to profit. What it's not is a platform for developers to create, because when they do, their efforts are for campaigns that need to appeal to the lowest common denominator, to be playable by the babies that won't touch it. Campaigns have been Call of Duty's leftover scraps for years, but in the past, they shined under a certain light. Black Ops 2 brought in elements outside of the FPS genre. Advanced Warfare had one level of freedom and mobility, and Infinite Warfare had tangible themes and likable characters. But World War II is a reminder that those fleeting moments were all they had. And when you lack them as this game does, all you get in return is the weakest campaign to date. The multiplayer may be alright, and as a result, completes Call of Duty's job. It's just a shame that's all this series is destined to be. And worst of all, at the cost of people who otherwise can make something remarkable. I've been making YouTube content on and off for 10 years, and I never thought in a million years I'd have anything that resembles this channel's scale, viewer base, or support. My passion has become my life, and it's only because of you, the people who watch, share, donate, and assist. I only live in the moment, so I don't know what'll happen in the future for certain. All I know is no matter what, I'll be grateful for the year that you've given me. Thank you, and have a very happy New Year. In regards to this channel, as many of you already know, it's going to start with something big. I've mentioned before that I want to host multiplayer sessions, and it will finally begin in 2018. On January 3rd, we'll be hosting a server for Neo Tokyo, the Ghost in the Shell inspired source mod that's free for download on Steam. To get in on this play session, simply join the Raycevick Steam group, linked in the description. Where are the temporary tattoos and other merchandise? In my mind. Why didn't you answer my question in your latest video? I thought you cared what I asked. When are you going to be on Total Biscuit's podcast? No idea, but I was just on Sparky's podcast. It's interesting. Do you think that we, the consumers, are at fault for the way our video games are being created nowadays? Or do you believe the blame falls more upon the developers, publishers, and corporate masterminds that are behind the curtains developing the game itself? Big question. And the short version is that I think we're all to blame at least some level. Do you send your scripts to your mom for proofreading? I actually used to when I was a teenager. She's a poet and writer herself. Follow-up question, what even is a mom? Something you never actually fuck with. What would you do for a Klondike bar? Dream pet. Tachikoma or Lagikoma? I know you said real animals only, but because it's you, Ham, I'm going to ignore it.